This is the urban exploring iceberg. 90% of these things I've done at the lower levels or seen friends do at higher levels. This rabbit hole goes very, very deep. Let's start at the surface. Level 1 urban exploring is just abandoned spaces, probably public or very well known and blown up to all hell. Everything is scrapped. Basically, only the structure is left because everything worth seeing has been stolen and vandalized. Easy places to get into to the point where it doesn't even feel illegal. A lot of the time, no signs and no fences. You can Google search abandoned Cincinnati or abandoned Houston, and these are the first results that pop up. Anything easily searchable is often not worth going to. Instagram, this was a big hub for urban exploring when it first came out, and I would really call it more urban tourism because people were hitting the same 4 to 5 spots, getting the exact same shots in the exact same place, especially a lot of foot dangling shots. I guess it looks cool, but to me it's very mainstream. It's specifically done for clout with no regard for the history of the location. No actual mission, just people asking each other for spots, pins, how to do the spot, with no real background of having done the hobby for a long time. This is more on the clout chasing side. Usually people here have a background where they can pay off a criminal infraction or they can afford a super nice camera, get high quality shots without caring too much about composition. With time and age, I've noticed that these people lock down spots a little tighter if they're still in the game. And I do have to give it to them in their quest for clout. Some of them do get some great shots and do hit some incredible spots. So HDR, this was a big thing. It means high dynamic range. It's a photography editing effect. People would go to abandoned spaces and take the same photos of chairs, mold, windows with this effect to make the image pop. But really, it's just this kitschy effect. If you're actually into photography, I can't see you liking this very much. Lightroom, that's your basic photo editing software. Nothing wrong with that. I use Lightroom. This is just all level 1 mainstream stuff. A good example of this level 1 stuff is pretty much any urban exploring blog. When I think of highly mainstream people, I think of Seth Lawless, who is often pretty hated by the urban exploring community for its selling out and blowing up spots, but I guarantee you he's laughing all the way to the bank. Level 2, this is a little bit more obscure and underground. This shows a little more dedication. Instagram really brought the hobby out into the mainstream, but before, you would find people on online forums like UER, which is Urban Exploration Resource, which were not as populated, not as easily searchable. Then you've got getting into rock climbing to be able to climb into spots better. Cranes, bridges, and tunnels, a little more dangerous. Your average person will walk into an abandoned building, but climbing a crane is not for everyone. Going to places with asbestos with a respirator, that's something you get into when you're a little deeper in. Using drones to scout locations, that shows some more dedication. Practicing parkour to get into spots and run into authorities, that's approaching the next level. Good example of this is Hamza Diaz with his high-up crane and bridge shots. He was very popular at the start of Instagram. Level 3, now we get to what most people don't see. Sewers, for instance. Most people are not gassed about sewers, and for good reason. They smell bad, you can get knocked out by the sulfur. You usually need a sensor to detect the levels. I've gone to some sewers, but I generally don't enjoy it. When I think of this level, I think of Desanct from Sleepy City. He's rappelling into the drains of Niagara Falls. He's motorbiking across third world countries. Hitchhiking, many people have done it. Not a lot of people I know doing it in the third world. That's kind of a next level. Those stories are always fascinating to me. People hop trains, sure, but doing it out in Asia where the consequences are more unknown and it's vast and remote and there's not as much information as in America, I think that takes some balls. Deep sea diving, again, diving is pretty brave. The ocean's scary. I think you're a true explorer for wanting to see what's down there in such unmapped territory. Same with Antarctica. At this point, you really just want to see the world. I'm not talking people who have money to blow on a cruise. I'm talking people who want to trek out to glaciers and map things out. 28 Days Later, this is a lesser-known, more UK-based urban exploring forum. Bridge substructures, that's a little weird. People like to climb bridges, but exploring the substructure of a bridge, that's not a thing most people want to do. Kayak exploration, going around to check on abandoned buildings and islands with a kayak, that takes another level of dedication. It's something I want to do in the future more, but generally requires a vehicle. Now, level 4, these are people who deep dive into research about obscure things and don't care too much about the consequences of their life. They have complete disregard for rules, social conventions, and even ethics. A lot of the exploring at this level involves things that people have not even considered just because it's beyond the scope of their imagination. So, for one example, highway interiors. You might not know this, but a lot of highways are hollow. In fact, most big structures are hollow because they require maintenance. But who's the last person you've heard of who's been hitting up the insides of highways? Exactly. High-profile construction. What I mean by this is places that are meant to become monuments like the World Trade Center, stadiums, places that are very heavily secured and take weeks, months, sometimes years of planning and waiting for the perfect conditions. Most people do not have the patience. Code name, I'm talking nobody knows what your real name is and you use an alias. Ice climbing, at this point you're an adrenaline junkie who wants to do things like climb K2, a mountain with a fairly low survival rate of climbing. Using disguises like dressing up as a utility worker or security guard to gain access to places. At this level, you might use a scanner to know if police units or SWAT team is after you, depending on the location. Graffiti lifestyle, I don't just mean doing graffiti. I mean you either squat buildings or are completely homeless, steal everything, spend every night painting, and you just have nothing to lose at this point. You have pretty much completely opted out of capitalism. There are people I heard of who have been doing this for years, especially a lot of train hoppers, and I'm shocked that life has not caught up to them. It's a rough and fast lifestyle, and I don't find it sustainable long term. The author of the zine Evasion especially romanticizes this lifestyle. Draining in the rain, this is a big no-no for exploring drains. People often get swept away and die, and this is an easy way for this to happen. There are documented cases of this. It's no joke. Don't do it. Then elevator surfing, again, beyond most people's imagination. You can get on top of an elevator and surf it as it moves up and down a building. I'm sure it's a rush. I have no interest in it, but all the people who explore long-term, I think, get into it eventually. Boat infiltration, that's where you go into either active or semi-active boats just for the hell of it, which runs the risk of crossing paths with the Coast Guard. Then you've got level 5, probably the most extreme level of what could be described as exploring. This is where you would face the most severe consequences if you get caught, potentially felony level or even execution, depending on the country and the circumstances. One of the most interesting ones to me, faking credentials. This is where you're already on the level of government agencies like the FBI and CIA. I've heard stories of people creating their own websites to gain access to infrastructure and information. It's like the movie Catch Me If You Can, where the dude fakes all his credentials through life. Or sneaking in this old dude into Fashion Week. Or this story I love, where a kid pretends he's a special ambassador to Israel to sneak into the Democratic debates in 2016. I think about that story a lot. Nuclear sites, I'm talking Chernobyl, of course, which I'm pretty sure YouTube removes those videos all the time, but also things like the story of this 80-year-old lady sneaking into an active nuclear facility just to spray paint one of their walls with environmentalist messaging. At this point, the risk is so high and the reward is so low that a lot of these things are not even worth doing. Another example is military sites. Some people hit them just to prove a point, but generally the only reason most people are there is to collect information and to spy back to another country. Again, treason could get you executed. At this level, I think of the show Tiger Team, where they would come up with plans to break into a dealership and steal a car. You're doing it just to show it can be done. Train surfing, not a great idea in general, but in Europe on those high-speed trains, some dudes will take suction cups and surf the train like that, going hundreds of miles an hour. It's mental. Digging your own tunnels. Here, I'm specifically thinking of Slim Jim and Sandland in Wisconsin, where he explored so many tunnels in his life that he thought, screw it, I'm going to buy my own plot of land. I'm going to dig my own tunnel system for other people to check out, purely for the purpose of urban exploring, essentially. Breaking into factories that are still active just to get photos. There are people who will never print any sort of photo online and never have any information that could connect back to them. There are people who I've hung out with at this level as well. It's just a whole different level of almost paranoia at that point. Then level 6, these are the things that I sort of put jokingly as like the transcendent god levels of exploration, where exploring is defined more abstractly, and this gets kind of conspiracy level, so don't take any of this too seriously. Things like Buddhist mind exploration, like meditating to the point where you hallucinate without the influence of drugs. That's a form of exploring, defined quite loosely. Hate group infiltration. This is a real thing that government agencies do. It stops high-level crime and terrorism, but it can also get you killed. Stories like Black Klansman depict this. That's based on a true story. Creating your own undercover police organizations. Now, I've heard about people making militias and neighborhood watch and vigilante groups and such. I don't know of anyone dedicated enough to pull this off without getting paid for it. Maybe it happens, but I've never heard of it. I just made this up. The closest parallel I can see is a drug cartel, but that's not like a police organization, really. Influencing government policies and multinational organizations, I'm talking this is your goal and you work for decades to complete it. Accumulate enough money and influential friends to literally shape the world how you want to see it. Like you're trying to be inducted into what people would call the Illuminati or Bohemian Grove or whatever you want to call it. Space exploration, this is not a goal that many can achieve, which is why I put it so far down the iceberg. Because if you think about it, out of over 100 billion people who have ever lived on Earth, maybe just over 600 have ever been to space. Literal colonization, I'm talking the ultimate expression of manifest destiny, where you want to not only explore the world, but conquer it for the greater purpose of a nation, leading to genocides, ravaging the natural environment. At this point, you're not even doing it to explore, but to show dominance over the land and other people. This is where it gets evil. And then last, invisibility cloaks. There are all these videos and photos that come out every couple of years that show people using invisibility cloaks, and then it gets debunked. But there are these papers saying that it's theoretically possible to make one. I think it would probably be just for military use, and they would probably deny that they have anything like it. So there we go. This is how deep the urban exploring iceberg goes.